My name is Olivia Whitfield, and I live in a white brick house on Laurel Street in Savannah, America. From the sidewalk, you'd think it was just another southern home. 2 oak trees guarding the yard, a porch swing that creaks in the wind, and a brass mail slot that's dulled from years of use. There's nothing about it that screams wealth or importance, and that's exactly how I like it. Inside, though, it's another story. The hardwood floors gleam like honey, polished every Saturday morning until they shine. The air smells faintly of lemon oil and coffee, and the hum of the ceiling fan keeps the house in rhythm. It's quiet here, too quiet sometimes, but peace is the one thing I can afford that money can't buy. On the long farm table by the window, I keep neat stacks of papers, contracts, profit reports, renovation estimates, and designs for my next project. Every morning before the sun breaks over the river, I sit there with a mug of black coffee and sign the papers that keep my empire running. It's strange calling it an empire, especially when no one knows it exists. To everyone else, my family included, I'm just Olivia, the woman who runs a little design studio and keeps to herself. But in truth, that studio is the beating heart of Harbor and Hearth, a company that buys abandoned homes and transforms them into boutique inns across the country. We started small. The first property I bought was in Providence, a peeling Victorian that smelled like damp wood and dust. I wrote the first check for $18,000, terrified that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But once the floors were sanded and the windows opened, the place breathed again. Guests came, then more guests. I reinvested the profit into another home in Nashville, then Santa Fe, and then Denver. Before I knew it, there were 27 Harbor and Hearth inns spread across America, each one filled with light, laughter, and stories of people finding rest. Last spring, our profits hit $7,800,000. I could have told my family then, could have walked in a Sunday dinner and watched their jaws drop. But I didn't. I kept every report locked away in a cedar box under the stairs. The scent of the wood comforts me. It reminds me that secrets, like cedar, can preserve what might otherwise rot in the open air. I didn't hide my success because I was ashamed. I hid it because peace is fragile. My mother, Margaret Whitfield, is the sort of woman who measures a person's worth by how tidy their kitchen is. She loves order, but only when she's the one giving the instructions. My father, Douglas, is a kind man, but he believes life is a competition, one he's determined never to lose. At Sunday dinners, he keeps score in invisible ink, who drives what car, whose children went to which schools, who owns the biggest house. My brother, Graham, their golden boy, learned early how to play the game. He calls it charm. I call it manipulation. Growing up, Graham would roll his eyes whenever I showed ambition. "You're too serious, Olivia," he'd say, laughing as if that were a compliment. When I started Harbor and Hearth, I told my family it was just a small side project. They nodded politely, probably assuming it would fail. I learned to tuck my dreams into quiet corners where no one could mock them, like folding fine quilts away in a linen cabinet. Then came the day I decided to give Graham a job. I had just opened a new property in Boulder, and I needed someone to manage it. My heart told me to give him a chance. My head told me not to. But hearts are stubborn things. I told my board that he was qualified, even though he had no experience. I said he'd bring fresh energy. In truth, I was just trying to save him from himself. I offered him a salary of $160,000 a year, far more than he'd ever earned, and even let him live rent-free in the stone cottage behind the inn. He was thrilled at first, charming everyone with his easy smile and stories about his vision for the company. I let it slide, thinking that a little ego never hurt anyone. But slowly, I started to notice the cracks. Late payroll approvals, missed calls, vendors who refused to work with him after one too many insults. When I tried to talk to him, he'd brush me off. "Relax, Olivia," he'd say. "You worry too much. That's why you're always tired." The truth was, I wasn't tired. I was disappointed. I had built something beautiful out of nothing, and I had given him a piece of it as a gift. But Graham didn't want to work for it. He wanted to inherit it. Despite everything, I kept hoping he'd change. I thought maybe, just maybe, if he saw the scale of what I'd built, he would grow into the kind of man who could share it. I even began drafting a letter naming him as the next chief executive officer of Harbor and Hearth. I imagined giving it to him as a surprise one day, maybe on his wedding. I would hand it over with a smile, say, "I believe in you," and finally let him step into the role he thought he already owned. But that letter stayed in the cedar box, waiting. Outside, the summer air of Savannah wrapped the house in a humid haze. On evenings like that, I'd sit on the porch swing and listen to the cicadas. My neighbor, Mrs. Kettering, would wave from across the street, watering her garden. She often said I had the calm of someone who's figured life out. I'd smile, but she didn't know how untrue that was. Calm is easy when you're hiding a storm inside. Sometimes, I'd think about what my life would be like if I told the truth. If I invited my parents and Graham over for dinner, poured them glasses of wine, and laid out every secret, would they be proud? Would they see me differently? Or would they ask how much they could borrow? How much they could own? I feared the answer too much to find out. Instead, I kept building in silence. Every dollar, every property, every document was another brick in a wall between me and them. I told myself it was protection, but deep down I knew it was loneliness. Still, the house on Laurel Street stood strong. It had become my sanctuary and my secret. I'd walk through the rooms at night, tracing my hand along the smooth banister, whispering plans to the walls. New inns in Portland, maybe one in Charleston. Expansion to Europe, perhaps. The world felt wide open, and I was its quiet architect. I often thought about that first check, the trembling signature, the uncertainty, and how far it had taken me. I had built a life most people only dreamed of. Yet the people who should have known me best didn't know me at all. I wasn't angry, just resolved. Someday, I told myself, the truth would come out. Maybe not in the way I planned, maybe not gently, but it would. And when it did, they would finally see me, not as the quiet sister or the too serious daughter, but as the woman who built an empire behind a white brick house on Laurel Street. Until then, I would keep the porch light on, the floor shining, and the cedar box locked tight. It was a warm afternoon in June when I first realized that something was wrong. The air in Savannah was heavy with salt and summer noise, the faint echo of a brass band drifting from the riverfront, the laughter of tourists, the cry of gulls looping through the pale blue sky. I was walking with Naomi Pierce, my oldest friend, who had been with me long before anyone knew my name outside our neighborhood. She wore a broad-brimmed hat and carried an iced coffee that was melting too fast. We talked about work, about her upcoming move to Portland, about everything except the one thing that sat like a stone in my chest. I had been checking my phone all morning, waiting for a message that never came. No invitation, no call, no text from my brother. Naomi finally noticed my distraction and said, "You keep looking at that thing like it owes you money." I smiled faintly. "I think my brother's getting married." "You think?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "I heard it from our cousin, August. Cleveland." I tried to make it sound like gossip, not heartbreak. Naomi frowned. "And you didn't get invited?" "Apparently not," I said softly. Maybe it's an oversight. Maybe the envelope got lost. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a mistake. Graham had been distant for months, barely replying to my emails, dodging company check-ins, and when he did answer, his tone carried that smug, polished charm that meant he was hiding something. My parents hadn't said a word either, though I suspected they knew. When I called home that evening, my mother's voice came through the receiver, cool and clipped, the way it got when she wanted to sound innocent. "Oh, yes," she said, as if it had just slipped her mind. "Graham's wedding is in August. It must have been lost in the mail, dear. You know how these things happen." I could almost see her glance toward my father, rehearsing the same lie together. "You should call him," she added, "but don't make a scene. It's his day, not yours." I didn't argue. I simply thanked her and hung up. That night, I walked down the stairs of my quiet house on Laurel Street and opened the cedar box beneath the banister. The familiar scent rose up, sweet, smoky wood, a hint of the lemon oil I used on the floors. Inside, nestled among old ledgers and letters, was the blue folder I had prepared weeks ago. It contained a single document, a letter appointing Graham Whitfield as the new Chief Executive Officer of Harbor and Hearth, effective on his wedding day. It wasn't just a title. It was my way of saying, I trust you. The position came with a salary of $500,000 and $250,000 in stock options, enough to give him a future and to free me from the daily grind of management. I had pictured the moment over and over again, standing under the wedding lights, the sound of music in the air, handing him the envelope with a proud smile. He would be surprised, grateful, maybe even tearful. I wanted our parents to see that I believed in him, that I was giving him something solid to build his life upon. But that vision faded the moment I realized I wasn't invited. Still, I told myself that love, family love, shouldn't be so fragile. So, I booked a flight to Cleveland anyway. I told Naomi it was just business. I told myself I was doing the right thing. The morning of the flight, I dressed in a simple navy dress, tied my hair back, and packed only a small leather bag. The blue folder slid neatly into the pocket. On the plane, I stared out the window as the clouds drifted by like torn paper. Somewhere beneath them was the city where my brother would start his new life, and where I might end ours. When the cab pulled up to the stone hall on the hill, the wedding was already in full swing. Music spilled out through the tall windows, and laughter floated down the steps. The building itself was grand, all limestone arches and stained glass light. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The lobby shimmered with chandeliers, their reflections dancing across marble floors. Guests in tailored suits and silk gowns drifted through the space like characters in a dream I hadn't been invited to. My parents were near the entrance, my mother adjusting the clasp of her pearls, my father with his familiar look of mild irritation. When they saw me, surprise flashed across their faces, followed by discomfort. Olivia, my mother said, her tone tight.
Oh.
You came. I did, I replied, forcing a smile. It's Graham's big day. She hesitated, then leaned in, as if sharing a secret. You should probably sit in the back, just to avoid confusion. The seating's been arranged for close family. I am close family, I said. Yes, of course, dear. But today isn't about you, my father added gently, his eyes avoiding mine. Let him have his moment. I nodded once. My throat tightened, but I refused to let it show. I held the blue folder closer to my chest and walked past them toward the reception hall. The room glittered, white roses on every table, gold-rimmed glasses, candles flickering in crystal holders. People smiled at me politely, not recognizing who I was. I was a guest without a name. When I finally spotted Graham, he was standing near the bar, radiant in a gray suit, his new bride, Evelyn Ross, by his side. She was lovely, poised, gracious, and unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I waited until a small crowd drifted away, then stepped forward. Congratulations, I said, my voice calm but shaking at the edges. He turned, his smile faltering for the briefest moment. Olivia, you came. Of course, I said. Families should be together for moments like this. He laughed awkwardly, and a few of his friends nearby chuckled too. Then, with a smirk that cut sharper than a knife, he said loudly, "This is my wedding venue. Begging is not allowed." The room went silent for a beat, then scattered laughter followed, like the sound of glass breaking. My cheeks burned. Every word I wanted to say knotted in my throat. I could feel my mother's eyes on me, my father's silence, the curious stares of strangers who didn't know the story, but loved the spectacle. I wanted to turn and leave. Instead, I took a slow breath, the kind that steadies the world. I met Graham's eyes and said, quietly but clearly, "You're fired." He blinked, as if the word itself didn't make sense.
What?
You heard me, I said, still calm. You're fired. His laughter died. How is that possible? I opened the blue folder, not to the CEO letter, but to the signed contract he had once begged me to draft. My fingers didn't shake. Because I own the company, I said. And you work for me. A murmur spread through the room. Someone dropped a glass. Evelyn's smile vanished. My brother's face went pale. I closed the folder, turned to the bride, and said gently, "I'm sorry for the scene. You deserve a joyful night." Then I walked out into the cool Cleveland air, my heels clicking against the stone steps, each sound steady, certain, final. In the taxi, I pressed my forehead against the window and watched the city lights blur. Somewhere behind me, my family was unraveling. Somewhere ahead, my life was beginning again, quieter, lonelier, but mine. And as the car pulled away, I whispered the truth to myself for the first time. Sometimes love isn't about what you give. It's about what you stop giving. The ballroom shimmered like a jewel box when I walked back inside. The band had started a new song, and the guests were clinking glasses, oblivious to the small storm that was about to roll through their celebration. The scent of roses and champagne hung thick in the air. I kept my grip tight on the blue folder as I searched for Graham. I wasn't nervous anymore, just hollow, like a bell that had been struck too many times. I found him near the bar, his hand wrapped around a glass of whiskey. He looked exactly how I remembered him when he was younger, handsome, confident, too sure of his charm. The difference now was the expensive suit, the polished shoes, the crowd of admirers that orbited him like he was the sun. His new wife, Evelyn Ross, stood beside him in a silver gown, her laughter bright and sincere. She was lovely, and for one painful second, I almost felt sorry for her. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Graham," I said softly. He turned, his smile wide until recognition hit him. His eyes flickered with surprise, then irritation. "Olivia. I didn't expect. Well, I didn't think you'd come." "I wouldn't have missed it," I said. "You're my brother." The words sounded smaller than I intended, but they carried weight. I opened the folder slightly, ready to hand him the letter I had once imagined giving with love instead of disappointment. But before I could speak, his voice rose, smooth and sharp enough to slice the air. "This is my wedding venue," he said, smirking for his friends to hear. "Begging is not allowed." A few guests laughed, quietly at first, then louder. It spread like ripples in water. I felt their eyes crawl over me, measuring my dress, my shoes, my presence. My face burned hot enough to light the candles on the tables. My parents stood nearby, watching but saying nothing. My mother's lips pressed into a hard line. My father's gaze drifted to the floor. They weren't going to save me. They never did. I lifted my chin. "You're fired," I said. For a heartbeat. The music seemed to stop. The laughter died, leaving only the faint clatter of a dropped fork somewhere behind me. Graham blinked, his mouth half open. "What did you just say?" "You're fired," I repeated. My voice was calm, almost gentle, but the words carried through the hall. Effective immediately. Evelyn's hand tightened on his arm. "Olivia, please, this isn't." "I'm sorry, Evelyn," I interrupted. "You didn't earn this moment." "He did." Graham's face twisted in confusion. "You can't fire me. You don't even work with me like that. You are the regional manager of Harbor and Hearth's Boulder property," I said evenly. "You signed a contract when I hired you. Section 5, Paragraph 3. Termination for cause includes negligence, misconduct, or actions that bring the company into disrepute. I think tonight qualifies for all three." His friends shifted uncomfortably. The guests who had laughed seconds ago now stood stiff, pretending to look elsewhere. I opened the folder and held up the contract, his signature neat and confident at the bottom. "You missed 2 inspection deadlines, ignored payroll issues for 6 weeks, and insulted a supplier so badly they refused to renew with us. I've covered for you more times than you'll ever know." "You were going to make me CEO?" he asked suddenly, his voice small, cracking under disbelief. "Yes," I said quietly. "Tonight. That letter was supposed to be your gift." I held up the envelope, still sealed, still clean. "But you've proven you're not worthy of the title. Not even the job you have." He went pale. His hand trembled, but his pride was stronger than his shame. "You're lying. You're trying to embarrass me." "No, Graham," I said. "You did that yourself." The silence that followed was unbearable. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, slowly, I put the CEO letter back into the folder and turned toward Evelyn. "I truly wish you happiness," I told her. "You seem kind. I hope he learns to deserve you." And then I walked out, past the band, past the rows of tables draped in white linen, past the tall cake that would never taste sweet again. I didn't run, but I didn't linger. The sound of whispers followed me like a shadow. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. The sky above Cleveland was spattered with stars, distant and steady. I stood on the curb for a long moment, breathing it all in. The smell of asphalt after rain, the faint hum of city traffic, the way freedom felt when it burned and healed at the same time. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was Victor Hale, my lawyer. I hesitated, then answered. "Olivia," he said, his tone brisk but warm. "I just saw the clip. It's already online. Someone filmed the entire thing." Of course, they had. People love a scandal more than a success story. "Are we protected?" I asked.
"Yes. Completely," he said.
"Everything you said was factual, and your right to terminate him is clear. But there's more. The board approved the expansion proposal. You're officially cleared for the Europe project. 12 new inns across America, 5 in Europe. Funding set at £3,200,000. Congratulations." For the first time that evening, I smiled, a small, tired curve of my lips. "Good. Proceed with the hiring process. Find a new manager for Newport. And double the training budget." "Done," Victor said. "And Olivia?"
"You did the right thing."
I wanted to believe that. I ended the call and got into a waiting cab. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, asked if I was heading to the airport. "No," I said. "Just drive for a while." We rolled through quiet streets, past rows of lit windows, each one holding someone else's life. I thought about how easily family can turn into strangers, how love can twist itself into something sharp when envy sits at the table. By the time I reached my hotel, my phone was full of missed calls, some from my parents, one from Graham. I didn't open them. I left the phone on the nightstand, slipped off my heels, and stood barefoot by the window. The city lights stretched out below me, gold and endless. Somewhere out there, the video of my humiliation and my truth was spreading like wildfire. Maybe that was justice. Maybe that was exposure. Maybe it was both. I made tea from the little hotel kettle, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the folder again. The CEO letter was still there, uncreased, untouched. I tore it in half, then into quarters, until it was nothing but paper confetti. I dropped it into the wastebasket and watched it settle. For a moment, I felt grief, not for my brother, but for the version of him I had imagined. Then I stood, washed my face, and whispered to my reflection, "You're free now." The words sounded strange but right. Outside, the city buzzed, alive with the noise of people who didn't know my name and didn't care about my story. For the first time in years, I found comfort in that anonymity. I climbed into bed, pulled the covers up, and let the hum of distant cars lull me to sleep. Tomorrow, the work will continue. Tomorrow, the world would remember me not as the sister who was mocked at a wedding, but as the woman who built something unshakable and had the courage to protect it. And if anyone ever asked what happened that night, I would tell them the truth in the simplest way possible. I didn't lose a brother. I found my strength. By September, the air in Savannah had softened again. The heat broke early that year, and for the first time in months, I could sit on the porch without the air sticking to my skin. I had returned home after the Cleveland wedding with a kind of silence that settled deep in my bones. No anger left, no grief sharp enough to cut, just stillness. My white brick house on Laurel Street stood waiting, patient as always, with its clean porch swing and lemon-oiled floors. I painted the front room a pale blue, the color of peace. The sound of the brush moving over the wall reminded me that healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small strokes. I cooked again, too. A pot of stew simmered on the stove, the same recipe my grandmother used to make. Jenna Moss, my head of operations, joined me that evening. We ate together at the long farm table, talking about the new inn opening near Asheville, the one with hand-stitched quilts from local artisans. Jenna had stayed with me through every storm, the one at the company, the one at the wedding, and the one in my heart. When the story of that night went viral, I expected outrage or pity. Instead, what I got was distance. My family called, but the tone of their voices had changed. Suddenly, I was someone worth speaking to again. My parents arrived one Sunday afternoon with a pie they hadn't baked and smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "We were worried about you," my mother said as she glanced around the polished rooms. My father complimented the furniture. Graham didn't come, but he sent long messages about misunderstandings, about how everything had gotten out of hand. A few cousins reached out too, asking for advice on buying property, slipping in questions about capital and investment. They all said they loved me. I heard what they really meant. They loved the idea of my success, the comfort it could bring them. I made tea, poured it into delicate china cups, and told them the truth in 4 short lines. "I am rich. I worked for it. You did not stand with me. I am not your bank." The words were simple, but they built a wall higher than any I'd ever known. They left that evening in polite silence, and the house felt lighter once the door closed behind them. After that, I decided to keep my circle small. I opened my door only for a few. Naomi, who always told me the truth even when it hurt. Jenna, who never once broke a promise. And Victor Hale, my lawyer, who not only handled my contracts but also asked if I was sleeping and meant it. Then there was one more name, Evelyn. Weeks after the wedding, she wrote to me. Her note was handwritten, the ink uneven where her hand must have trembled. She said she was sorry for what had happened, that she hadn't known what Graham was capable of that night, that she wanted to build a marriage based on honesty, not image. I believed her. I sent her a set of crystal glasses as a quiet olive branch, not money, not an apology, just a symbol of clarity. Business grew faster than I expected. The Asheville Inn opened with 14 rooms, each one filled with sunlight and the scent of cedar. By winter, Harbor and Hearth had cleared $9,400,000 in quarterly profits. I wired £500,000 to our Europe team to finalize the purchase of a stone manor overlooking the sea. Some nights, when the wind rustled the oaks outside, I imagined walking through that manor one day, hearing laughter echo down the halls, the kind that comes only from peace earned the hard way. But mostly I stayed in Savannah. The white brick house became my quiet empire. I'd wake before dawn, pad across the cool floor, and sit at the farm table with my coffee. The same table where I once signed contracts now held small joys, letters from guests, sketches from architects, thank you cards from staff. The cedar box under the stairs was empty now, except for one thing, a note I wrote to myself on a slip of stationery. Stand tall, Olivia. Build with care. Keep the doors that matter, and close the ones that don't. That's what I did. I closed the door to noise, to greed, to people who only knock when they need. And I kept the one open that leads to peace, to purpose, to love that proves itself in silence. The house still looks ordinary from the road, but it holds the story of a woman who stopped apologizing for her strength. Not a queen on a throne, not a beggar at a wedding, just a builder, standing steady in the life she made with her own hands, and for me, that's enough.